Hello everybody and welcome back to Out of Body 13 Nights of Halloween. In today's video we're going to be talking about The Conjuring. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, there's going to be some spoilers in this video. However, I think you'll still find it interesting even if you haven't seen the movie. But what I'm going to be specifically talking about is the true story behind the movie The Conjuring. Now I know the beginning of the movie starts off a little bit about Annabelle the doll. Now I'm not going to go into that in this video, but I'll probably do that in a future video. What I'm going to be talking about is the Perron family, which is the family that lived in the house that was haunted, that was sort of the main storyline of this movie. Now if you have seen this movie, you're probably thinking, oh well, the true story is probably not as scary as the movie was. Well, think again. So according to Ed and Lorraine Warren, as well as members of the Perron family, the movie is not over dramatized. It's actually not as scary as what really happened. There are several events that actually happened in real life to that family that they did not include in the movie. In fact, one of the young girls that lived in the home at the time, when she grew up, she actually ended up writing a book about her personal experiences in the home. And I have not read the book, though I've seen some interviews with her. And some of the things she talks about are just flat out terrifying. And I will get into her experiences later on in this video. So first I'm going to go into the home and kind of a little bit of history about it and what the Perron family as a whole experienced there. So the land that the house lives on was purchased in the 1600s. But the house itself was not finished being built until 1736. Now the home is located in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and the Perron family actually moved in the winter of 1970. Now the Perron family lived there for 10 years total, though they do claim that most of the horrors they experienced were in the first 3 years, though they did continue to experience some things throughout the rest of that 10 years. Now one thing that is interesting is that the house they used in the movie is obviously not the real house. It looks completely different than the real house. And what is interesting about the real house is that according to the Perron family, the hauntings at first seemed pretty light-hearted and friendly. Like there were spirits kind of playing with the kids and, you know, things like that. I think there was a little boy spirit that would play with one of the girls. So they just thought it was just harmless at first. However, as time went on, the activity got more and more sinister. So once the Perron family decided to look up a little bit of history about the home, they found out that there was a family that lived in the home for several generations. And unfortunately, many of the children in that particular family over the years had somehow died. Some of them drowned in the lake. One of them was actually murdered. And a few of them allegedly hanged themselves in the attic. So after learning about this history, it was kind of a little bit more understandable and made sense as to why there was so much activity in the home. One of those spirits in particular formed sort of a strange attachment to the mother in the Perron family. Now that spirit would later identify herself as Bathsheba. Now this spirit really wreaked a lot of havoc in the home, especially with the mother in the Perron family. So the mother in the home would experience physical ailments due to this spirit's hauntings. She would wake up with bruises or scratches sometimes, and at one point she was actually stabbed with what felt like a sewing needle, and eventually the spirit would possess the mother. Now Bathsheba is actually a woman who did live at the property at one time. Her full name was Bathsheba Sherman, and she was born in 1812. She was married to Herman Sherman, and from what they say, she actually sacrificed any of the children that they had. And one baby in particular that was in her care was later found with a sewing needle puncture to her head. Now, do you remember when I mentioned the sewing needle earlier? That the mother and the Perron family had ended up with the same kind of puncture wound? Kind of interesting. Now she died in 1885, allegedly due to hanging herself, and later on when the mother in the Perron family sees the spirit of Bathsheba, she claims to see her with her head kind of cocked to the side as if it was snapped. So kind of confirming that she did die by hanging herself. So at some point, Ed and Lorraine Warren were called by the Perron family to help them to try to get these spirits out of the home, or at least keep them at bay. Now, Lorraine Warren was a very, very sensitive psychic. She could see ghosts and, feel spirits, and she would have visions and things like that. When she entered the home, she immediately sensed a sense of jealousy between the spirit of Bathsheba and the mother in the Perron family, which her name was Karen. While the Warrens were in the home, they tried to do many, many cleansings, ultimately up to no avail. Nothing really helped. It only sort of made it worse. Now, in the movie, something that is a little bit different is that in the movie, they show the Warrens doing an exorcism. That didn't really happen. What did happen, though, was they had a seance. Now, according to Andrea Perron, which she is one of the children in the home that I mentioned earlier that later wrote a book about her experiences, she was actually the eldest daughter. According to her, the seance actually ended up opening up a portal that could not be closed. So, in essence, it made it worse. Now, as a result, the Perron family actually ended up asking Ed and Lorraine Warren to leave. So ultimately, that's a big difference between the movie and real life, because in the movie, they act like the exorcism cured everything and everything was great. But that didn't really happen. The seance actually made things worse. Anything they tried seemed to only make it worse. And so the parents ended up asking Ed and Lorraine Warren to leave because they didn't want things to continue to get worse and worse. And so the family continued to live onto the property for an additional 7 years due to financial reasons. Now, what is interesting is that even when they moved from the home, they actually moved to Georgia after that. And they say that they continued to experience paranormal activity even after they moved. So it's almost like whatever was there might have followed them. Now, though there are some slight differences between the movie and real life, the Perron family as a whole has claimed that the movie does represent 100% of what they went through in their experiences in that home. Now, getting back to Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter in the Perron family, she later wrote a book, and that book is called House of Darkness, House of Light. Now, there are several things that she talks about in a particular interview that I had seen, and I will try to remember to link that down below so you guys can watch that for yourselves. But there are some interesting stories that she recounts in that interview that did not make it to the movie. And to me, some of it is way creepier than the movie. So one of those experiences that Andrea remembers is she remembers hearing her sister Cindy repeating this phrase over and over again because apparently she had been hearing it over and over again. She had been hearing voices repeating this to her, and so then she would repeat it to her sister Andrea. And the phrase was, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the walls. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the walls." Like, she kept hearing that over and over again. And so she would tell her sister about it. I can't even imagine how terrifying that was to hear your little sister saying that. Now, on a lighter note, she says that the youngest sibling in her family actually made friends with a little boy ghost, and that was one of the hardest parts of leaving the house, was that the relationship that her youngest sibling had with that little boy ghost had to end. Now, Andrea points out that the home was once owned by the Arnold family and was known as the Arnold Estate. And from what she has researched over the years, she found out that a Mrs. Arnold that used to live there is actually the one that hanged herself. That Bathsheba Sherman, who lived there, did not. So that does make it a little bit confusing because the spirit did identify herself as Bathsheba. But according to Andrea, the spirit might actually be Miss Arnold, who did hang herself, but she was posing herself as Bathsheba, or at least saying that she was Bathsheba, in order, I don't know why, in order to, I guess, put the blame on someone else. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you that she recounted in this interview is so terrifying. I don't even know how they would have done it in the movie, to be honest. So I can understand why it was not put in it. So what had actually happened was that Andrea, at one point in the night, she had sleep paralysis and she actually had an out-of-body experience. So what happened is that she awoke in the middle of the night And instead of being in her bed, she felt, well, at first she was in her bed and felt as if she couldn't move, but somehow she was able to see from a perspective of being in the air. And what she was seeing was her mother in bed, which her mother was in a different room. I think her mother was downstairs and then Andrea was upstairs. She saw her mother and father in bed. She saw her mother in a little bit of distress. And that's when she saw this entity floating in the room that her mother was in, coming towards her mom. Now, when I describe what she said this entity looked like, it just sounds terrifying. The entity had a gray dress, no feet, was floating in the air, had on a tight bodice. The dress had lace all the way up to the neck. The neck was snapped and the head was drooping downward, sort of hanging down, she says. And when she describes the face, she says it looks like a desiccated bee's nest, semi-featureless, but there were black holes where the eyes should be. She had thin lips, yellow pointed teeth, straggly hair, webs around her hair, and slits where her nose should be. Now, if that doesn't just sound like something out of a horror movie, I don't know what does. But that is what she claims that she saw. She swears that this is what she saw. The entity kept floating closer and closer to her mother, and she saw her mother struggling and trying desperately to get away, trying desperately to wake up her husband, which was Andrea's father, but he slept through the entire thing. Now, once the experience had ended and the entity, I guess, finally dissipated or went away, her mother ended up taking the blanket off of her father and noticed that he had scratches all down his back. Now, later on that morning, when Andrea got up for the day, she went downstairs and she saw her mother frantically drawing or sketching on a notepad. And when she looked at what her mother was drawing, it was the exact entity that she remembered seeing in her experience. And the next thing that Andrea noticed was the grandfather clock, which had stopped at 5:15, which is what it always did, which is in the movie. The clock would always stop at 5:15 when an event happened. When something happened significantly paranormal, the clock would always stop right at 5:15, because I guess it would happen at 5:15, I assume. Now, from what I remember in the interview with Andrea, she ends up kind of speculating, like I said earlier, about the Bathsheba entity not really being the spirit of Bathsheba, but being the spirit of Miss Arnold. Part of the reason why she feels that way is because of what the entity was wearing, because of the dress that the entity was wearing would have been more in line with the time period where the Arnolds lived there, which I'm not 100% sure what time period that was. But she talks about it more in depth in the interview, which you guys can watch. Now, one extra piece of information that my mom actually found, shout out to my mom. She's always helping me with my videos and like giving me ideas and stuff. And so she gave me this article, which I had heard about, but I'd forgotten about when I was doing my research for this video. The home that the Perrin family lived in was actually recently up for sale. Now, it went on the market for $1.2 million. So yes, it is up for sale. I'm not sure that it's been purchased yet. Since 2019, it's been owned by Corey and Jennifer Heinzen, and they actually turned it into, they're paranormal investigators actually. And so they turned the home sort of into a tourist attraction. And business is doing so well that they just decided to sell. So yeah, I just wanted to add that little tidbit at the end here that it did go up for sale. And it's interesting that paranormal investigators actually bought it at one point recently and have been able to have tours, and they actually had overnight stays as well where people could come and stay the night or investigate and things like that. So I think that's really cool that they did that. And I think they're hoping for the next person who purchases the home to continue the business and to do the same thing with it. So we shall see. So that is it for this video. At some point I might do a part 2 once I've read her book, because I do want to read her book at some point. You guys definitely check out her interview if you want to. Otherwise, that is the end of this video. I hope you guys found it interesting. If you have not seen the movie, I would definitely recommend it. It's a very, very good horror flick, and there's 3 of them now. Each movie kind of displays a different story, so to speak, although they all kind of connect, if that makes sense, as far as Ed and Lorraine Warren, the paranormal investigators. The Conjuring movies basically go over different experiences that they had in their work. So different places that they would go and try to do exorcisms or try to help families who are experiencing hauntings. So if you'd like me to do more stories like this, like true stories behind a movie kind of deal, let me know if you found that interesting. I know other YouTubers have already done it, but I just felt like it would be interesting to bring on my channel. So let me know what you guys think of that, and I will see you in the next video tomorrow for 13 Nights of Halloween. Bye!